They came from nowhere. We had no warning. For 10,000 years, humanity knew only peace. We put aside the petty squabbles of our infancy and set out to explore the stars. Slowly but surely, we crossed the vast distances of space, expanding our knowledge and our civilization. Where we found nothing but emptiness, soon new outposts of humanity flourished on terraformed worlds, and vast, void-bound arcologies orbiting stars our ancestors had only known as distant pinpricks of light. Red giants and neutron stars, nebulae and twin planets and asteroid spheres and black suns. And still we kept searching. We discovered and explored a cornucopia of astronomical wonders. But life was a rarer jewel than any other. In only a handful of systems in all the known galaxy did we find anything more complex than an amoeba, and intelligent life was the rarest prize of all. We eventually learned that we were not the only intelligent race in the galaxy. But the others were ancient beyond the most distant memory of mankind, powerful and incomprehensible, and not inclined to lower themselves to our level. They had their own interests, and they did not concern us, and in the unimaginably vast expanses of the cosmos our paths crossed rarely. Even they had their limits, though, and we soon learned our. Many of the earliest dreams of humanity proved ephemeral upon waking. No teleportation, no transmutation of elements, no time travel, and despite our best efforts, no transportation faster than the speed of light. It was an ambition that consumed us for millennia, and in the end it came to nothing. We pushed outwards for several hundred light years in all directions around our old cradle, Earth, but we did so in ships that took years or even decades to reach even the closest star. We had long since conquered our mortality, though, so this was a less bitter pill to swallow than it might have been. The fundamental laws of the universe remained beyond our power to break or even bend, but the human body itself? We are far less mysterious than we would like to think. You could be disassembled and rebuilt, with no more difficulty than an ancient artificer would take apart a clockwork watch. Those who wished to travel the reaches of humanity's realm did so at the speed of light, their minds captured perfectly in neural maps and slung, photon by photon, at a serenely drifting city orbiting some distant star. Humanity had everything it could ever need or want. You could spend 100 years visiting the glittering metropolises of Orion and return having aged only days, or you could spend 100 seconds in a simulation meditating for a subjective millennia. And then they came. We called them the others, or the aliens, or the travelers, or Species X. But mostly we called them the others, because we didn't know what else to call them. They were like nothing we had seen before. The first non-human species that showed an interest in us. Not that we saw them, only their ships. They made no attempt to talk to us. They just attacked. We had no warning. It was impossible for there to be any kind of warning because they had something we did not. That one law of the universe that we had thought immutable was apparently not so absolute. They could travel faster than the speed of light. I cannot describe to you the shock of seeing their ships appear in the system as if from nowhere. They reached us much faster than the light of our star reflected off their hulls as they approached us. It was like suddenly discovering that magic was real. And then that shock was totally eclipsed by mind-numbing terror as they opened fire on us. No warning, no negotiation, not even an ultimatum. They brought us death in silence. I had lived in the Arcadia system for almost 20 years at that point. One among over 100 billion citizens scattered across 3 planets, 5 moons, and hundreds of space habitats, each kilometers across. I had made it my goal for the next few decades of my life to visit each of them and experience their beauty. Even across the 1,000 worlds of the human diaspora, Arcadia was famous for its culture, its art, and the joy its people took in creating such a brilliant beacon of civilization in the vast darkness of space. If I were a poet, I would describe to you the crystal arches that hung over the great concourse of Daedalus Orbital, where you could look up between their sparkling lattice and see the sapphire blue seas of the planet Elysium below. I was corporealized there after being transmitted from Aquila, and I'll never forget stumbling through the crowds on new legs, eyes upward and jaw open in wonder. I wish I could tell you how I felt, what I saw, but I could not do it justice. I will tell you, however, that the 10-kilometer-long orbital shattered like a broken ice sculpture as it was carved apart by energy beams and fell in glittering shards like frost thrown to the wind. That was what came to mind as I watched, from afar, utterly helpless to do anything else as Daedalus died, knowing that over 50 million people died with it. I was on board Icarus, a habitat that had, for the past few centuries, been repurposed as a research station. Daedalus's smaller relative, and like our namesake, we were flying perilously close to the sun. Unlike our mythical counterpart, however, we knew what we faced and took serious precautions. Our mission was to study Arcadia herself up close and in detail, and to that end we were reinforced and shielded against her violent tempers. Close to 2 million people lived quite happily skimming through the outer layers of her dazzling corona. All of us watched, the nausea of horror chewing at our guts, as one by one the larger orbitals of the Arcadia system were methodically reduced to fragments. We saw the engine flares of ships trying to flee, only for one of the others to suddenly appear nearby and annihilate them with lances of light the color of rubies. And all the while, we knew that the moment we were watching was already several hours past, and the unknown, monstrous ships could appear beside us at any moment. They killed Arcadia. They killed the system dead, hunting down every orbital, every outpost, and every ship, before finally turning their weapons on the cities sitting helpless on the planets and moons. There might have been some survivors, out in a log cabin or a small settlement in the wilderness. They did not go to the effort of destroying the biospheres. But by the time they were finished, more than 99.9% of Arcadia's citizens could not have survived. It only took a few days for them to erase more than 100 billion people from existence. Then they began to feast, consuming the ruins of the orbital habitats, stripping them of every usable resource. Using more refined energy beams, they carefully butchered them and took what they needed, leaving only the heaviest support spars, gleaming white like the bones of a whale hunted for its oil on ancient Earth. It was when slaughter stopped and the salvage began that we realized that they hadn't seen us. Whatever reality-breaking engines they were using, their sensors were no better than ours, perhaps even inferior. They couldn't see us, sheltered as we were under the blanket of Arcadia's blazing fury, but our sensors had been calibrated for the environment, and we could see them. And yet, we could do nothing. We sent messages to the nearest systems, but having seen what we had seen, we knew they would not arrive in time. We had no weapons. Why would we ever need them? So we could do nothing but watch as they stripped the system bare like a swarm of locusts. They took their time over it, not wanting to miss a morsel. First weeks, then months passed. We were safe where we were, and we had all the energy we needed, but our ability to survive in the corona was not indefinite. It might be decades. The habitat was virtually a closed system, almost self-supporting, but not entirely, and eventually we would have to leave. If the others intended to stay, we would have no chance. So we began to design weapons. We cannibalized parts of Icarus, taking apart equipment that had been intended for the pursuit of science or the development of technology and turning into a thing designed to kill. Plowshares into swords. I donated what expertise I had, which wasn't inconsiderable. I had traveled widely across the galaxy, and I'd spent decades in Centauri learning high-energy field theory and particle physics there. Our AI, named Icarus, was more sophisticated than most due to the dangerous nature of his mission. With many stoppages and setbacks, we developed weapons that could accelerate a small amount of mass to as close to the speed of light as made no difference. We had no illusions about our chances. Even if we could fire at them, how could we possibly hit them when they could move faster than we could see? But it seemed like our choices were either fight or die. Something long dormant stirred within us. We were human. We would fight. Then they started to leave, with just as little warning as their arrival. After almost 4 years of fear, the others began to move on. They had taken everything we had, almost everything. And now, like a locust swarm, they were moving on to the next feeding ground. We judged from the angle of their ships before they accelerated to light speed that they were heading for our nearest neighbor, Aquila. They were 6 light years away. Our warning would not reach them for another 2 years. Calculating based on the speed with which the others darted around our system, it would be almost 2 years too late. They did not leave all at once. Most of them, 100 or more, left in the first wave, but a few dozen remained to continue their looting of the minor outposts. One by one they left too, until there were only a handful of their ships left in the system. Then just 4 and 3 and 2. Icarus was tired of hiding, both the ship AI and its people. We had watched them destroy everything we loved, and we had prepared ourselves for war. We were not about to let this end without a fight. Not for revenge, though, or because we could not bear to go on, but because we knew that if humanity was going to survive at all, we had only one slim hope. We had to capture one of their ships, or at least one of their engines. The only possible way to warn the countless billions of humans throughout the diaspora was to take one of the other's faster-than-light drives and reverse engineer it, then jump ahead of them. It was also the only chance of resisting another genocide, for without FTL warships of our own, even forewarned, the rest of the diaspora could do little. And we were the only ones who stood the slimmest chance of pulling it off. If they saw it coming, they could effortlessly step aside and we would die a moment later. We only had one chance. We had built 6 weaponized accelerators, and we aimed 3 at each of the 2 remaining ships. We dared not wait until they were down to 1, in case they both left together. We only had one chance. They were in the inner system, drifting lazily a few light minutes away, and we calibrated our guns so that the rapid-fire projectiles would reach each of them simultaneously. We only had one chance. We waited a day after the 3rd remaining ship had left. There was no point in waiting any longer. As soon as we were sure they were both in a stable orbit, Icarus fired. That was the longest 17 minutes of our lives. 8 minutes and 36 seconds for the projectiles to reach their target, and 8 minutes and 36 seconds more for us to see the results. One hit. In an instant, a ship was turned into a cloud of shattered debris. One miss. At the last moment, the 2nd ship made a minor course correction, just enough to unwittingly avoid the deadly shards ripping through the void towards them. Their first reaction was to run faster than light could follow towards their partner. When they found only wreckage, they fled away again. It must have taken them several minutes to analyze the trajectories and work out what had happened. They arrived a few thousand kilometers off our bow 21 minutes after we fired our shots. We had one chance. We failed. But we had known that failure was a possibility. So we were prepared. Using the centuries of data that had been accumulated about the star Arcadia, and in part based on my expertise in high-energy physics, Icarus and its inhabitants devised a weapon that could trigger a level 1 coronal mass ejection. A massive solar flare, in other words, large enough to cover millions of kilometers. Too random to hit anything more than a few light minutes away, but if the target was right next to the star, we assumed we would be dead before the shockwave reached us. The others' weapons were still more effective than our own, and there was no reason for them to stay still and let us shot our mass drivers again. But we would at least have the satisfaction of knowing we would not die alone, and our last words to them would be, "Dodge this." The energies thrown off by radiant Arcadia must have disrupted their targeting sensors. They fired, but they missed, by only a few kilometers, but they missed. They fired again, and came a little closer. We toasted the end with sorrow and sparkling wine. They did not have time to fire again before the forefront of the shockwave reached them, rising up to hit them at the speed of light. This first layer didn't destroy them, but it must have disrupted their engines because although they had time to see the rest of the flare coming, they weren't able to jump away. At last, they got to experience what it felt like to see death coming faster than you can escape it. To sit helpless with no way to escape or do anything else but watch. The main body of the flare hit us both a few moments later. Our shields were designed to handle it. Theirs were not. We survived. Even given Icarus's special modifications, we were all slightly surprised. Cautiously, careful not to overstrain our battered hull, we finally ventured out of the corona. The ship that had fired on us was nothing but a trillion glowing flecks of molten metal accelerating towards the outer reaches of the solar system. But its partner, the one we had destroyed with our first shot, had been spared Arcadia's wrath. It was in pieces, but they were pieces large enough to study. In some ways, it was only now that the real challenge began. We were attempting to do something that the collective efforts of every human and AI for the last 10 millennia had failed to achieve: build an engine that could travel faster than the speed of light. We didn't know how much help the wreckage of one ship would be, but we knew how much rested on our success. It was shortly after this that the first distress calls started to arrive, from systems further out in the diaspora, pleading for help as they were slaughtered. All of them from people years or even decades dead by now. They kept coming, and after a while they weren't even calls for help, just warnings, and whatever data they had gathered on the others before the end came. There were also refugees, digitized and broadcast in the final moments. We downloaded them into artificial bodies as soon as there was room for them. There were only a few. There had simply not been enough time. More could have been saved, but they knew transmitting their data on the others was too important. Most of it was nothing we hadn't already seen for ourselves, but a few little pieces were from stations that had been much closer to the deadly ships as they wrought their carnage. From our vantage point in the Corona, there had been things we had missed. The last act of these stations had been to broadcast this information to anyone who could hear, just in case there was someone still alive to make use of it. Make use of it we did. Using the pieces of the engine we captured, the data we had gathered ourselves, and the data we had received, we slowly began to understand how the faster-than-light drive worked. It used physics that was totally unknown to us, but all the clues were there. Bit by bit, we worked out the theory, and then the application. And finally, we built ourselves humanity's first working faster-than-light drive. For our first test, we built a small ship controlled by a copy of Icarus AI. It worked, but it ripped the ship apart in the process. The next attempt was more successful, although after its first trip the test ship was in no condition to make the journey back. The third ship was larger and it survived a longer flight, but it was still seriously damaged, as was the fourth. Frustration built upon frustration. It was almost as if we could hear the cries of the billions dying while we failed over and over again. It was the fifth test ship, Icarus VI, that carried the first FTL drive that could be used without tearing itself apart. Finally, the time had come. With bittersweet memories, we bade farewell to Arcadia. With elation for our success and heavy hearts for the bad tidings we bore, we set course for our ancient home, Earth. It pained us to abandon Aquila, but we all knew it was too late for that system and the billions who lived there. However, if the others continued their pattern, they would stay there several years, confident that they could outrun any warning sent by Aquila. We had time to reach the next systems before they did, hopefully. We found Gliza and its 170 billion inhabitants as vibrant as ever, blissfully unaware of the slaughter sweeping the galaxy around them. We wept, seeing in them what we had lost. We stayed just long enough to warn them and make sure they understood our warning and took it seriously, and give them the plans for our FTL drive. Then we went on to Tau Ceti and Zhenlong and Starhaven and Centauri and half a dozen others, until finally we reached the center of humanity's realm, Earth. Close to 1 trillion humans, countless AIs, and all the accumulated resources and knowledge of 10,000 years of civilization. They questioned us, each and every one of us aboard the Icarus and the Icarus itself. They questioned us closely, but once they were sure we had seen what we said we saw, they did not argue. The whole titanic strength of humanity's beating heart turned towards one purpose: to build a fleet for war. Icarus was not a warship, so it stayed behind in orbit of Sol, but I and many others of its citizens, and a copy of its AI consciousness, signed up to fight. Long-forgotten treatises from the dark old days of humanity's violent youth were dusted off, and new ways of fighting developed for the age of FTL. In just a few short months, we had what we needed: an armada. When the others arrived at Gliese, we were waiting for them. I could describe to you the shock they felt when they found the prey that were supposed to be defenseless and oblivious were armed and ready for them. But I would only be guessing. They must have been even more shocked to see us use their own technology against them. But whatever they felt, they didn't feel it for long. They had hundreds of ships, we had thousands. As soon as we saw them, we activated our FTL and charged straight at them. Most of them only had minutes to contemplate what was coming for them, and some had less than that. Some tried to fight, Others tried to run. None of them got far. We smashed the first wave at Gliza, and then we split up. Some stayed behind to wait for the stragglers, but others headed out for other systems. Scouts had been sent out to the farther reaches of the diaspora and found dead system after dead system. We mourned for the loss so many and for the era of light that ended in such darkness. But we did not stop. The others had several fleets moving in concert, timed to strike before traditional causality allowed them to be seen. An elegant system, always staying just ahead of the light cone, but a predictable one. We prepared a similar reception for each of them at their next destinations. Their vagrant empire might be deadly, but it wasn't efficient. They had only the manufacturing capacity they could carry aboard their ships, and there was only so much that could be salvaged from the wreckage they created, whereas we had the combined industrial might of a vast and complex civilization. Like all nomads, they relied more than anything else on striking and moving on before any opposition could organize. Their one asset had been their speed, and now that advantage was gone. The arms of our armada reached out to embrace them, an arc that stretched across 100 stars, a dozen separate fleets awaiting theirs as they emerged from the void. Each time they arrived right on schedule. We came from nowhere. They had no warning.